Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of Soft Edges. I am Maïs Rucal, and here with my dear friend and co-host Lucy Gerard, we will continue discussing Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, specifically the section between pages 81 to 123. But before we get into that, how are you, Lucy? How are you doing?
Hello everyone, I'm doing good, Maïs. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I think the diversity of what we will discuss today is quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting. I was super interested in everything that was said in these chapters. They're also super different from one another, I have to say.
Yeah.
So I think that'll definitely be an episode that's going to keep our audience on their feet.
Exactly. We will jump from theory to a poem to some images and to a wonderful essay from Brown herself.
Yes.
So shall we just jump into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So we begin with the chapter titled Why We Get Off, Moving Towards a Black Feminist Politics of Pleasure by Joan Morgan, the Jamaican-born, South Bronx-raised legend, author and journalist who coined the term hip-hop feminist through her book When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost. She's one of the pioneers in theorizing the black feminist politics of pleasure as a liberatory project of sexual autonomy and erotic agency. As the founder of the Pleasure Ninjas, a collective practicing critical intellectual labor by, quote, reframing the existing narrative on black female sexuality by positioning desire, agency, and black women's engagements with pleasure as a viable theoretical paradigm, end quote. So what makes her legendary in my eyes is her invaluable contribution to theorizing the contemporary black feminist agenda and providing us new framings to certain existing narratives within progressive feminist movements that were harmful in certain ways.
Yeah, definitely.
I especially find her effort in centering black women's sexuality within the context of generational, intersectional trauma while emphasizing pleasure to be very important. As Morgan quoted Professor Brittany Cooper, there is no justice for black women without pleasure. And
Yes.
I really agree with that.
I completely agree with that, and I find that statement extremely important to remember.
Absolutely. Moving through this text, I actually want to shortly bring up the feminist novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who was referred in this text,
Yes.
before jumping deeper into the text itself. And here I need to give our listeners a trigger warning, I think, for mention of transphobia. So please feel free to skip ahead a bit. Taking a little time for you to do that. So, yeah, I wanted to mention this because I can't pass without stating that a feminist author mentioned in this important text, namely Adichie, expressed to Guardian in an interview dated November 14th, 2020, that she thinks J.K. Rowling's horrifyingly transphobic essay is in fact a perfectly reasonable piece. This is what Chimamanda said.
Okay.
And which did hurt, but it wasn't entirely a surprise, because also in 2017, in an interview with Channel 4 News, she also said, trans women are trans women. So she made this distinction,
Oof.
but in the context of highlighting the differences in the experience of being a cis woman and being a trans woman. But the fact that these two life experiences differ in many ways doesn't make this manner of differentiating any less transphobic, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely.
Because trans women are women, and in the overarching experience of womanhood, cis and trans women of course have different life experiences, but especially basing this difference in a claim that trans women spend a portion of their lives embodying male privileges is so cruel and so transphobic to me. Because how can people genuinely believe that trans people or gender non-conforming people ever truly experience the privileges of cis people? Like, that doesn't exist. No, I really don't
No,
agree
that doesn't
with
make
that.
sense.
Exactly.
That's just not how I see it. And I think these kind of comments are extremely harmful. It's not only harmful, it's just as you said, it's cruel, and perpetuating such beliefs and spreading those beliefs is something that needs to stop right now, period.
Exactly.
It cannot continue this way. It's just harming more people. It's just neglecting, refusing, denying rights and love and care to a group of people who already suffered so much on a personal level. So why not stopping this whole bullshit thing and just stop harming each other? Let's accept one another. Like stop this conversation immediately, you know?
Exactly. The intention might be the intention might be just underlining the difference in experiences, but the manner this is done and some certain claims, like for example trans women having embodied cis male privileges, is just strange and outrageous to me. When your life is spent in fear of constant bullying and violence, and constantly experiencing the violence of misgendering while just wanting to survive as you are, it just feels so cruel to me when cis people dare assign any sort of cis privilege to trans folks for the lifetime they spent conforming either one gender or another before finally being able to live their own truth.
Exactly, absolutely. I agree with you. And I also find it really strange that cis people would speak in the name and the experience of trans people by affirming such things without even doing any research, by being in contact with trans people and actually putting themselves in a position where they are, for once, I'm speaking of cis people here, for once, not trying so hard to overpower other people, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calling J.K. Rowling's essay a perfectly reasonable piece, I mean, no, I'm sorry. It really wasn't.
That's a huge disappointment.
Absolutely.
It's definitely not. It's the opposite, actually.
In my previous podcast, which was in Turkish with my friend Helin, we discussed her J.K. Rowling's essay in detail. After 2 weeks long research, we tried to put out like a research-based critique on the text. And after that experience, I can never agree with someone who says that this piece was a perfectly reasonable piece. It really wasn't.
No.
Yeah. But so, of course, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie undoubtedly had precious contribution to feminist theories. And I must say, her piece titled Notes on Grief, that was published on the New Yorker website on September 10th, 2020, was a beautiful text. And it really did touch me. It was a beautiful text about a total different topic. But we have very different views on certain topics, and I just wanted to mention that before we get deeper into the text.
Yeah, that's good. I was not aware of her comments about J.K. Rowling's essay.
Yeah, now that we have that out of the way, back to Joan Morgan's text.
Yes.
I wanted to highlight her mention of Black female interiority. So feelings, desires, yearning, and taking them out of the captivity of the politics of silence. I think that's really valuable. And when a mode of embodiment, such as being in the body of a Black woman, becomes both invisible and hypervisible, theorizing new ways of articulations of such an interiority becomes really crucial, I feel.
Yeah, definitely.
And Morgan's effort in taking it out of a very heteronormative context is also incredibly valuable, I feel, by involving issues of pleasure, sexual agency, and queerness in the discussion and even bringing them to the center.
Yes.
I love that.
I love that too. I think it's extremely important. And I think it's also, it feels good, it feels comforting to see someone really put at the forefront people or desires as well that are not often talked about, especially within the realm of Black feminist thought, as she says it herself.
Yeah, absolutely. What a pioneer for the new age of Saturn and Aquarius, I feel. She was such a great pioneer for that.
Yeah.
Also, Morgan's mention of Black women's visual and performance culture, new erotic possibilities shifting from the enslaved to the pop star to the sex worker, is also incredible. And this essay was published in 2015, and I would have loved to hear Morgan's rendering of WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion.
Oh, yes. Oh, that would have been amazing.
I think WAP is so relevant for this text. It's so relevant. And for Morgan's hip-hop feminism, seriously.
I'm sure she would have loved it.
Yes. I looked around on Google, and I didn't really find any comment from Morgan
That's too
specifically
bad.
relating to VAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, but I really would have loved to hear her rendering of it.
I mean, I could see her mention this specific song in that specific essay.
Yes, exactly. I think it would be here if this essay was from 2020.
Yeah.
But she already wrote it in 2015 or perhaps even earlier, and paving a great way of theorizing that kind of a movement. And also, VAP is so relevant in the context that, like, the backlash it received, even more indicative of the misogyny, specifically towards black women, when we saw how the wide-ass world lost their shite in beholding two women of color owning their sexuality and their bodies like the way they did.
Woof, that was something. The whole social media internet world was upside down. I could not believe what I was reading.
Exactly. Oh my god.
I was like, you need to calm down. Excuse me. These are two beautiful black women empowered in their sexuality.
Exactly.
What's wrong with that? Please someone explain to me what the fuck is wrong with that.
They're just expressing that they can do whatever the fuck they want to do with their own bodies towards achieving any goal they deem fit with it. I mean, what's wrong with that? And I was particularly amused by the comments of, like, white guys who were like, can't believe our children have to listen to this music.
Oh my god.
And, you know, promoting prostitution.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Give me a break. Have they ever listened to any rap song before that male
Oh my
have
God,
written
yes.
for I don't know, like fucking 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years? We've had men write the most outrageous rap lyrics, the most degrading
and downright
lyrics.
misogynistic,
yes,
by the way.
degrading towards women mainly. And towards the
and homophobic,
the queer community as well, but nobody said anything about that.
Absolutely.
Nobody.
Where's the outrage then?
Yeah, exactly. Even Eminem, who's a super famous, super successful rapper, had some of the most homophobic and misogynistic lyrics of all times in the 2000s and in the 90s. Excuse me. I would much rather listen to Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion sing about their wet ass pussies. That's just me.
I mean, what's wrong with a woman saying that she wants you to touch that little dangly thing that's hanging in the back of her throat? What's wrong with that?
And that is poetry.
Yes, exactly.
Excuse me.
Profound poetry we're talking about. Ugh, why are they
Seriously.
so... Yeah.
And I truly think, for me as a woman, I can honestly say that I was missing these kind of lyrics nowadays. I was missing this kind of empowering, super sexual, super sexy, super woman power song.
Absolutely.
And I love dancing to it. I love listening to it. I love twerking on it. I love picturing myself twerking against Cardi B's butt.
Yes. I love that.
So fuck them, you know?
Yeah. Well, with Morgan's text, what's also brilliant to me is how she's integrating a cultural specificity to US black women's ethnic heterogeneity and queerness.
Yeah.
Because blackness in the United States is not a mono-ethnic experience with a singular racial narrative.
Nope.
And she asserts that it is necessary to break the comfort of assuming blackness through an African-American essentialism and specifying the experience of black women with roots in Caribbean or other parts of the diaspora. Yeah.
I found that super, super important and super interesting, because it's true that it can only be harmful to only attach, to put it in simpler terms, to only attach one narrative and one image and one example of black women or black people in general, and apply that to everybody that's part of that community, because it's just erasing all of the rest of the experiences. And it's also not a positive practice to assume that one person's experience is applicable to millions of others.
Exactly. And also, when a person of color or when a black person complains about the use of the term BIPOC towards them, there's something very understandable in that, because they don't want to be reduced in that specific context to that very general statement or that term, when their experience is specifically a black, maybe African American experience. So And of course, terms like BIPOC or POC have a lot of use as well for intersecting experiences of people of color and black people.
Yeah.
But then all of that theory and language around it should be expansive and not reductive.
Exactly, yeah.
So I love that as well. But not only in terms of ethnic background, but also in expressions of non-heteronormative submissiveness, hypermasculinity, aggression, exhibitionism, and voyeurism that she mentions in the text. I just love that, how she keeps her definition of erotic so close to the expansive definition of Audre Lorde, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And like allows all of these modes of expression a space in her text.
Yeah, extremely inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. And by doing so, she makes all of them erotically legible in black feminist theory. And here I want to read a paragraph that is very key to this, I feel. It's from page 96, and Morgan says, "How can someone be specifically Jamaican, generally West Indian, a queer black American citizen, and claim an African motherland through reggae, a political identity vis-a-vis engagements with African American radicalism, or a cultural identity steeped in hip-hop? These generative frameworks are possible when a diaspora study is put in conversation with black feminist thought."
Wow.
This is the complexity
It's
that
really...
we need in these discussions.
Absolutely. I love how intricate and yet so clear this part of the text you just read was.
It's such a key part, right?
Absolutely. It's a core part.
These questions really express the necessity of such an expansion in these discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like her assertion that the middle-class African-American feminist academics cannot be a stand-in for all black women, right? And speaking for the totality of black experience is nearly impossible, just like it would be with the totality of other ethnic groups or the queer experience as well.
For sure.
So I find her questioning of like, who is this emergent subject and from where do they speak, a primary approach to any text or narrative. I really like that, and I really try to ask that question when I'm confronted with a text and be like, okay, who is saying this? In what kind of a standpoint? Is this a white person? Is this a person of color? Is this a black person? Is this a cisgendered person? Is this a straight person? A queer person? Like, it frames a lot of things in the way they express certain issues or theories.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to do that little background research or check even in your mind quickly, or have that reflex at some point, because it can also really help understand better not only the person who's sharing their experience or whatever they're writing or sharing, but also how you can receive it and how you should receive it too.
That's so true. Because where they're coming from tells already a lot about the way they frame things.
Yeah, for sure. And
then relating that to where you are is really crucial.
Yeah, definitely. And it can really avoid a lot of heartache, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something else that I wanted to mention, actually, is a moment in this chapter, in this essay, where when Joan Morgan talks about Patricia Hill Collins, and I wanted to read a little excerpt from that quickly. In that moment of the essay, she talks about the separation of the erotic from pleasure and how it's harmful to black female sexuality and black feminism as well. And there's a little text that's taken from Patricia Hill Collins' essay called Black Sexual Politics, African Americans, Gender, and the New Racism, published in 2004. And in that specific little excerpt from her essay, she mentions honest bodies, and she says, quote, "Rebelling against the rules and reclaiming the erotic means that black, straight, and gay people alike can support one another in claiming honest bodies that are characterized by sexual autonomy. Using one's honest body engages all forms of sexual expression that bring pleasure and joy. Overall, soul, expressiveness, spirituality, sensuality, sexuality, and an expanded notion of the erotic as a life force that may include all of these ideas seem to be tightly bundled together within this notion of an honest body that is not alienated from itself, and where each individual has the freedom to pursue his or her sense of the erotic." End quote.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about this small excerpt was it felt like there was lots of freedom generated through the reclaiming of sexuality and pleasure and the erotic, right? But I was also very curious about the use of the term "honest bodies."
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that caught your attention as well, and how do you actually interpret these words?
Yeah, the first time I heard of that term was in this text as well, and from that excerpt too. I have to do further research on that term, I feel, because it's, of course, when you have a quote in the essay, it's taken out of a general and bigger context. And
of course, yeah.
through this little part, my impression of it is honest bodies. So then there's also a dishonest body, when you claim something is an honest body.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a tricky field to name.
Right.
And to create a terminology around it. Yeah.
Yeah, I also had that feeling. I didn't fully understand, but I do need to go a little bit deeper around that her use of the specific term. But I did feel like this separation was maybe a little bit icky to me, to have honest bodies versus dishonest bodies. But I think Morgan actually reacted to that in such a beautiful way, because actually, as she mentions a little bit earlier before introducing this small excerpt, Joan Morgan does say that Patricia Hill Collins makes a separation, obviously, between, she says herself, between the erotic and sex/fucking. And in response to that, Joan says, quote, "In other words, I want an erotic that demands space be made for honest bodies that like to also fuck," end quote.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of rounded it up for me in that moment, where I was like, okay, that feels better all of a sudden, right? To not have to necessarily segregate honest bodies, quote unquote, and dishonest bodies, quote unquote, as well.
Yeah.
And to also think we don't have to separate those two things, the erotic pleasure and sex/fucking. To me, that's a very personal choice. It depends on what you like, what are your kinks, what are your pleasure triggers, what do you like, what do you not like. That's very much subjective, right? And it shouldn't be, when talked about pleasure and the erotic, I don't think it's a good thing to put one on a pedestal and the other one as something that's negative or not respectable, right?
Exactly. Or to assert such rigid definitions, right?
Yeah.
Or to suddenly involve a very morally ambiguous term in it. I mean, if you want to coin a term like an honest body, you have to support it with so much theory, I think.
I agree.
To just like justifiably use such a term. And thus I need more research of it. But just like you just said, Morgan reacted to it in a beautiful way, and reading that also made me feel like, yes, exactly. This was where my discomfort about this excerpt was laying. And now I understand the reason of it.
Yeah.
And now I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
With your point.
Yeah, I think
Morgan. This is how I felt.
Yeah, same, totally. And I think if our audience is following along the book or isn't yet, I think it's an important passage in this essay, among many others, of course, and I would recommend reading through it to understand a little bit better what we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, I want to close this chapter by reading the last part by Morgan, which lays out the importance of pleasure politics very clearly to me. She says, "I hope to make a contribution to Black feminist thought that encourages recognition of Black women's pleasure, sexual or otherwise, as not only an integral part of fully realized humanity, but one that understands that a politics of pleasure is capable of intersecting, challenging, and redefining dominant narratives about race, beauty, health, and sex in ways that are generative and necessary."
Yes.
This little excerpt is almost, for me, a little summary of why this book is very important. This book, Pleasure Activism.
That's so true.
Yeah.
That's so very true.
Yeah. It's like a core of it.
Yeah, I love that. I love how she ended it. It's a good reminder for all of us.
All right, we continue with a short conversation with Ingrid LaFleur titled A Pleasure Philosophy, and Brown introduces LaFleur as the founder of Maison LaFleur and Afrotopia, a fashionista, artist, and most likely to make bank on Bitcoin, who ran for mayor of Detroit in 2017 as an Afrofuturist candidate. So, interesting, because we mentioned pleasure relating to fashion before, actually, in our first episode, right?
Yeah, that's true,
and
we did.
We go a bit deeper or a bit to a different side of it. Because in this conversation, LaFleur touches on how pleasure she received from fashion helped her move through the grief of the passing of her father, and specifically through the help of sequin pieces.
Yes, I thought that was such a beautiful story and experience that she shared. And as a sequin lover myself,
I know.
You know that. We were both, funny little anecdote for our audience. Last year for New Year's Eve, we actually were matching. And we were both without planning, we were both wearing beautiful sequins pieces. So,
yes, exactly.
But I thought that her own experience of grief and healing and going through this grief by adding color and glitter and sparkly things that she would wear and that would provoke a reaction in others, and that would in return feed her soul and feed her heart and bring her a little bit of joy and warmth in this dark moment, was just it just warmed my heart. And I just thought it was beautiful.
And this also actually, in contrast, reminded me of how the old tradition of Hindu people in India, when their widows were expected to wear only white saris, right? I think this tradition largely isn't practiced anymore, but it's so interesting how different cultures connect grief to clothing. And in many cultures also, the acceptable funeral attire is in somber colors, right? As black and maybe dark brown and such, or gray.
Yeah.
Because bright colors are associated with happiness. And I was curious, actually. I wanted to ask you, do you remember a specific event or situation in your life where the fashion or the color you wore was directly connected to that moment in some way, or the spirit of that moment?
And in what sense do you mean?
For example, how LaFleur went through the grief with the use of sequin pieces, like associating a situation with a piece of clothing, or have you preferred a certain color for a certain period because of certain reasons, or a fashion item for the same way as well?
Yeah, for example, to me, yellow is my happy color. It's the color that will always bring me joy, which is odd because I don't wear it that often. But when I do wear it, I always relate it, I always associate it with happy moments in my life, because it reminds me of the sun, it reminds me of the beach, it reminds me of the ocean too, oddly enough. As we talked about in our last episode at the very end, I am a mermaid and I am the most happy at sea, and so that's what it reminds me of. I think the sand the sand of the beach, the sunshine.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I think in that way, yeah, definitely.
Yellow is such a joyful color to me. I love it as well.
Yeah?
Yes, I love yellow.
You have a beautiful yellow bag, and I think also a beautiful yellow sweater, right?
Yes, I do. Love that.
I love those.
And for me, wearing bright colors or tighter pants or some stylish or daring outfits was a way to resist the heteropatriarchal oppression towards male clothing in Turkey, towards men's clothing.
Yeah.
So I live in Holland since 2015, and thus I don't know if it changed a lot, but Turkey has one of the most boring clothing stores for men. The color palette is from black to brown. I kid you not. And the prints are only with those manly cornered fonts, right? Very aggressive fonts.
Ew.
And boring images. Ugh, I really had such a difficult time with that back in Turkey. And it's actually not that different in Holland as well, by the way, but there are more colors and it's somewhat more accepted to wear colors for a man, I guess.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
I don't care anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I mostly shop from women's clothing anyway because the options I feel are more diverse and I feel better in them. And
Oh, definitely.
I like the way women's outfits highlight a more natural body shape somehow
Yeah.
that uplifts the ass and the hip and the thighs. And men's are really designed to make you look like a rectangular square shape, and I really don't want to look like SpongeBob. So I really enjoy shopping from the women's section. I want a little hip up there, a little thigh down there, a little ass. Like,
I mean,
come
yeah,
on.
definitely. You definitely should wear clothes that highlight your ass because we both know it's wonderful.
Thank you.
But actually, I'm still waiting for a brand to come out with a line of clothing that's completely not gendered.
Yes, exactly.
And that's just beautiful and colorful with very different textures and very different shapes and pieces of clothing that can highlight different parts of your body without thinking necessarily about the person's gender. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that would be amazing. I think we need that right now. And I'm so shocked that we still don't have that.
Absolutely. I mean, Kim Kardashian's brand Skims, they have this loungewear collection that I have my eyes on because my moon is in Taurus and I have more loungewear than daily fashion. But so she frames those pieces also very gendered, and it always kind of bothers me, like, why? It's just a very comfortable pants. Like, why do you have
It's
to
loungewear.
gender it? And then recently she has a boyfriend collection that's unisex, and I really also don't like the term unisex.
No, I don't like it either.
Because it unifies the binary, right?
Yeah.
I really don't like that.
Unisex? What do you mean unisex?
Ew, it's such an old term, so old-fashioned.
Yeah, so no, I think it's better to say gender neutral completely.
Absolutely, come on. Leave
Gender
people
neutral
alone.
clothing.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm curious if anyone in our audience knows a brand of clothing, a small business or a bigger business even, that actually specializes in gender neutral clothing. I'd love to have their contact or their websites, their Instagram, whatever it is. So please let us know because I am dying for that.
Absolutely. You can text us on Instagram or you can write it on the comments on YouTube as well. Wow, I would love to discover some as well.
Yes, share your tips.
Sweet.
Sweet, sweet.
So jumping back in the text, there are points that I agree with LaFleur, and there are points that I find a bit tricky.
Which ones?
For example, I agree that in principle, every moment of every day should be a pleasurable experience. I love that. And I think that's a wonderful thing to aspire to strive for. But, so a second trigger warning for our listeners, for I will shortly mention eating disorders. So please feel free to skip ahead a bit. So, LaFleur's take on food and her mention of going into a spiral of body shaming after eating something that is super delicious but makes her feel sluggish and tired, her mention of fresh, clean and healthy food, and directly bringing these in a relation with ultimate self-love, for me, lacked a certain acknowledgement of people living with eating disorders and battling very complex problems in their relationship with food.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Because in the text, it feels a bit like this is all about making the right choices, but...
Yeah, but it's not always about that. It's not necessarily a conscious choice, unfortunately. As someone who has battled with eating disorders, I felt a little bit shamed when I read that's part of the text. I felt like, oh damn, like am I just not making the right choices? Is that all it's about? But I know deep down it isn't. But so I think her wordings, I imagine it was during a conversation on the phone or something and she didn't really think about it. I'm sure her intention wasn't to not include those experiences. But indeed, I agree with you that I think it was worded a little bit insensitively.
Absolutely. And also I had the sense that this interview feels a bit more condensed in the transcription of it, for example, compared to the one with Cara Page, right? So perhaps the actual discussion was more nuanced, and I also don't want to state that or assume that LaFleur doesn't understand or didn't experience an eating disorder herself.
No, definitely
because I
not.
just simply don't know these details about her life. It's just that this rhetoric around making right choices without the acknowledgement that for some folks this choice is very difficult or just simply doesn't exist, always just lacks something and doesn't sit right with me. Not specifically attributing this to LaFleur and the way she expressed it, but people who went through or still battling eating disorders like me as well knows that it's not as simple as making healthier choices related to food. And our engagements with food doesn't mean that we love ourselves any less than someone who has the privilege of engaging with food in a very rational debate and decision making, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to acknowledge that, because for those of us who have a difficult relationship with food, we can't always rely on logic when it comes to food, and we can't always rely on love either, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's important to say that it doesn't have to have something to do with your self-love practice, actually.
Exactly. And there's another point that I also want to relate to the way you highlighted the honest body terminology from the previous text. I noticed when she said, when LaFleur said, I work daily to be courageous enough to indulge in the purest pleasure of self-love. And I found it tricky to engage with terms of courage, cowardice, right? And purity in this context. So I think I understand what she means, but in a broader frame, I find it difficult to place these terms in a pleasure politics discussion in the correct and in a nourishing way.
Yeah.
When we talk about courage, we also talk about cowardice, right? And that's a bit of a harsh assumption about someone who just isn't able to indulge in pleasure very directly because of the current context that they're in. Or the term pure always makes me feel a bit icky as well.
Me too.
Pure.
Me too.
In what sense?
Yeah.
Pure.
What's the criteria for the purity that she talks about and that she mentions?
And what is stained?
Yeah, exactly. What is impure?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be impure, or to have a pure and an impure practice of pleasure? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just it just didn't really connect for me when I read that part of the text either. And to go back to what you were saying about relating indulging in pleasure and self-love practices as being courageous, I don't like it either. I really don't. But I think I see what she was trying to say.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think the word courage should just be taken out of conversations around pleasure and self-love.
Yeah.
Because I think it just immediately puts a negative connotation for certain people who can read this text and think, I don't have that courage, so I'm a coward. I don't have that courage. I don't have that strength to engage in those practices, so I'm a piece of shit. That's what someone could think reading that. And I think, as I just said, this word should just be taken out in this narrative.
That would be definitely,
Yeah.
Making someone feel that way would be unfair.
But I think what I did like about her this conversation, this interview, was the focus on little gestures that bring you joy, right? Little gestures that can heal you. Atypical habits, such as for her wearing sequins while mourning and grieving the loss of her father. That's something that really resonated with me, and that's what I remember from this conversation, rather than the things that maybe made me feel a bit icky.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm left with as well after the end of this chapter.
Yeah, definitely. I actually was wondering if you had any gestures or habits that could be considered quote unquote atypical or out of the ordinary that are pleasure generators for you.
Interesting. Well, maybe organization, Lucy, and I think you can really relate to that. Because you're the queen of spreadsheets.
That was going to be my answer.
And organization makes me feel so good. Such a pleasure to feel like, everything is in its right place, functioning, makes sense. time is managed, like in the way that I want it to be managed, and I can see ahead, right? Like these things really give me pleasure. Virgo ascendant is speaking. But I know that you share that too. But what would be your answer to that question?
I mean, I would have the same answer as you, honestly.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I relate to all of what you just said. But yeah, organizing my day, seeing my calendar, checking boxes, color coding, spreadsheet making.
That's so
we
you.
both know. Yeah, right. We both know
Yeah.
that there's nothing more me than that.
And I love that.
I really do. I take so much pleasure, and it brings me so much pleasure to do those things. I don't know why. I couldn't explain why, but I just do.
I love that. I love that. For me, that also includes like weekly or monthly plannings, or like calendars that state birthdays that I want to remember, or special days and appointments, and everything being under control and visible to me. It's just, yeah. Like my favorite space to be perhaps is at home, is at my desk, at my little workspace.
Yeah, definitely. Same.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just need a more comfortable chair, to be completely transparent.
Oh, I can recommend you one.
Great. We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah. Thank you for listening so far. We will take a short break and we'll be back with you in a second.
Trigger warning. In the next section, I will briefly mention women's reproductive rights related to Fabiana Rodriguez's work as well as her experience. So feel free to skip ahead if this topic is a sensitive one for you.
All right, shall we move to section 2, the politics of radical sex?
Let's do it.
Okay, the chapter begins with 2 quotes. Forget health clinics and gyms. Sex is the best cure. One good night of sex and your problems are gone. Grace Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And an orgasm a day keeps the doctor away. By Mae West.
I love that. I agree.
Beautiful medicine.
That's the kind of prescription I need.
COVID literally made it impossible for us to use that medicine.
I know, how sad.
I know. Okay. The following are some examples of the work of Fabiana Rodriguez, titled Pussy Power, described as liberating sexual relationships and the rights women should have over their bodies. So they are very colorful images with bold black linings, accompanied by, I think, their individual titles, such as Where Did You Learn Stigma?, Pussy Power, I'm a Slut, It's My Pussy, Decolonize Pussy Power, and Over the Rainbow.
Yes.
How did you engage with these images?
I honestly, truly loved her representation of vulvas, for example, and her use of color too. And I found the titles to really be powerful and in your face, which I really appreciated. And actually, I did a little bit of research about her, and she made 4 posters in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. One of which I think was titled Pussy Power. And it was, again, with very bold writing, with quotes such as, "The slut nation is here and we're pissed off. Run and hide, you misogynistic, crusty fuckheads," which, I mean, yeah. I can only agree with.
Love that.
And but I really liked the intention that she had behind that specific poster. And you can find that on her website, which is fabiana.com, if I'm not mistaken. But she basically, I'm going to read you a little bit of her explanation. And so for that specific poster, she says, quote, "I came out about my own abortion in order to break the silence and to shed the shame. By telling my story as a Latina woman, I was putting a face to the debate and complicating the narrative. I was being unapologetic in how I told my story and celebrated sluttiness. I was fed up with misogynist politicians who were working to further limit and hinder our access to our reproductive rights through anti-contraceptive measures. The right to control your own reproduction is the most fundamental right we have as human beings." end quote.
Beautiful.
And I thought that was a really, really beautiful journey, but also vulnerable and raw experience sharing, right? And I love that she just put it all on a big canvas or a big poster with really raw and really aggressive messages. I think it was completely deserved and also her own right to do so.
Exactly. I love that. Just like Morgan mentioning aggression, right? As a part of the diversity of a black female or a woman of color's experience, aggression being a part of that. Rodriguez did it really well in transforming this very vulnerable and personal experience into a political power.
Yeah, definitely.
The way I engage with this small section is also similar to Adrienne Maree Brown's footnote for her poem Sex Ed. And there she says, quote, I included this poem for those who identify with the words/anatomy used in this poem. It feels important for me to get to write a poem that feels accurate and powerful for my body. I invite other poems for those who need other words and/or have other anatomy. End quote. So, similar to Brown, I find it important for folks identifying with an anatomy including a vulva to create material that is empowering and expressive in their desire, demands, and rights and their politics. But right next to that, and not related to Rodriguez's work directly, I find feminism defining womanhood centering vulva and reducing or basing the experience of womanhood to the physical, anatomical reality of a common formation of vulva on a body to be a bit trans-exclusionary sometimes. So I really appreciate the little footnote Brown added at the end of her poem, Sex Ed.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's definitely a lot of value in forefronting vulva as an organ and how it relates to womanhood, but I just feel like it is important to not base the entire experience of womanhood on the existence of an anatomically common formation of vulva.
No, absolutely not. We should never do that. I think for Rodriguez in particular, she based it on her own experience as someone who has a vulva, and that's why she represented it. But I don't think that it's necessarily inclusive of other experiences indeed and other anatomies. So it's important to mention that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, do you have any notes on Brown's beautiful poem Sex Ed?
Yes, I do.
I'm curious to hear.
Yes, I think it was a really beautiful poem, and as you mentioned, I really appreciated the footnote. I found it super important and inclusive and loving and caring to all readers out there.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated how Adrienne Maree Brown in this poem is basically celebrating all the states and all the shapes and all the feelings and emotions and even pains that she has experienced in her body and that so many of us can relate to in our own bodies. And I also really liked how it's very focused on the physical, right? She reminds us to touch ourselves lovingly and to learn our own bodies before sharing it with other bodies, other people, other partners. And I just loved that because that's something that I don't think I was ever taught as a young child or a growing woman. And the way that she wrote it was also, to me, really beautiful. It was the kind of poetry that I think is very accessible because the melody of it, the rhythm of it is immediately, at least for me, immediately in my bones. It's immediately in my mind when I'm reading it. And the words, the content is also so touching and the right amount of, I would say, lessons or advice and just pure poetry, basically.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I just thought, wow, throughout the whole poem, I couldn't help myself but think that's something that I wish someone would have told me when I was younger.
Yeah.
Would have saved me so much heartache, struggles, and self-doubts and mistakes.
Yeah.
Although I definitely don't look at those experiences through a lens of regrets necessarily. But I believe it's such an important reminder and an important value to teach all human beings of all ages. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hence the sex ed. And it really, the entire poem really sounds like the voice of a wonderful guide
Yeah.
that I wish I also had in a very crucial time in my
Like
life.
an older sister or an auntie or something.
Exactly. I mean, so much of that early experiences I had with my body was really surrounded by a lot of shame that other people constantly have been pushing into my mind, right? And if only someone like Adrienne Marie Brown would just appear out of nowhere and just say those things to me, like, it's okay that you're touching yourself, it's wonderful that you're experiencing this pleasure, that you're getting to know your body,
Yeah.
and then guiding me in a path of doing this safely and freely and happily and joyfully.
Definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's precious.
She's so precious.
Yeah, she really is.
I really appreciated this poem and the way that she included it in the book right after Fabiana Rodriguez's paintings and right after Joan Morgan's essay. I think it was truly also the perfect placement within this book.
Exactly. The curation of the book so far is so on point, in my opinion as well.
Oh, absolutely perfect. Yeah. So yeah, and I also appreciate the vulnerability with which she shared this poem, because I myself am a writer, and writing something like that is, in my own experience, something that can be really raw and maybe even timid to share. Obviously, Adrienne Marie Brown wrote this entire book around topics that can be very raw and timid to put out there, but especially in poetry form, I thought it was quite the choice and quite the addition. Yeah,
that's very true. And here you already hear Brown's experienced voice in guiding growth and transformation.
Definitely. She's very skilled.
And the last chapter of this episode, the next section, it is titled Wherein I Write About Sex, 5 Tangible Tools of a Pleasure Activist by Adrienne Marie Brown. So first of all, I love that she shared her blog the night Beyonce's self-titled album came out in 2013.
Oh my god, yes.
I love Brown's blog, by the way. It's filled with wonderful essays, as you can imagine. And it's just no wonder to me that that blog and the album Beyonce came out into the existence on that same fateful night. What a wonderful night that was.
It was no coincidence, I trust.
No, the stars dictated this. Yeah, it's beautiful. And this essay is like witnessing Brown's coming out as a pleasure activist to her audience who previously knew her for her work on transformation, babies, grief, and growth. And she even confesses that she struggles with integrating this image with her real-life practice of looking at life through a sensual, sexual, and erotic lens. And this reminded me of that hilarious meme with Tiffany Pollard. Maybe you... Do you know that one?
Which one?
Maybe you've seen that one. That says, when I tweet about ass eating, then switch up and educate people on why Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. I've seen this one.
I just love that meme.
It's the best.
I love it. And I get that vibe from Adrienne Marie Brown in this text a little bit, at least
so
at
true,
the beginning.
Yeah. That's very true.
I love that. Beautiful. And I really love the mention of her dream, through which she feels that she was healed a bit on a very subconscious level, and regarding her relationship with her body, I mean. And this really resonates with me, especially her emphasis on healing on a subconscious level. Because in my personal experience also, for example, I rationally know that I love myself, and I love my body, and that it's beautiful, it's attractive, and it's worthy and such. But there's also so much subconscious trauma that manifests itself in ways that contradict that rational knowledge in my life, you know? And so much of my healing effort is in bridging that gap between what I know and what my subconscious feels and asserts sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine,
Yeah. And she shares a lot of vulnerability around body image and food in a way that I really appreciated as well. She talks about changing habits that will liberate her from her particular socialization, or perhaps I could also call it long-term trauma responses. In the text, she gives us 5 tools of a pleasure activist. So the first one is self-love. And she literally means it in the context of loving, feeling, and touching yourself freely without the oppression of shame.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
To experience that naturally and safely, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an important part of her teachings, right? And that's something that she definitely wants to put in the forefront of the conversation. I really appreciate how she asks herself how to come up with healthy ways to engage children around their bodies and feelings without shaming them.
Yeah.
That's something that I really found to be almost, almost unheard of.
Yeah.
Because you don't really hear that very often, especially so openly and so well-spokenly as well.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I never really had the proper self-love in that specific sense education when I was younger. I had, of course, the sex talk with my parents, and I was aware of what it meant, but I kind of discovered self-pleasure and touching myself on my own. It was almost an accident, I think. I was kind of like, ooh, that feels good, that's odd, and I just kept on doing it. But I do think that I felt a lot of shame for loving, touching my body when I was younger.
Yeah.
I started doing it, I guess, at a young age, and my parents knew, probably because they walked in on me or something, I don't remember. But I remember one specific moment that I think is still anchored in my mind and is still maybe almost traumatic to this day in regards to my relationship with self-love nowadays. But we were at a kiosk in Paris where they sell magazines and such. My mom was just talking, I think, to the kiosk lady, and I started opening porn magazines and looking at pictures of naked women. And I can remember so clearly which picture I was looking at. And suddenly my mom saw me, and she felt so embarrassed, and she was so shocked, and she was obviously flustered, and she just apologized to the kiosk lady, and she dragged me out of the store, and she told me, these are not for you, you can't do that. And I remember being like, I don't understand what's wrong, because I think I was really young. I don't remember how old I was at the time, but it's still with me. It's still something that I think about, although, of course, a lot of things have evolved in my sexual exploration, of course, but it's something that I still remember. And I was wondering if you ever felt shame around your own body exploration and sexual potential when you were younger, or if you ever had good conversations with either your parents or an educative figure in your life about that topic.
Yeah. Before I answer your question, thank you for sharing that memory from your childhood, because I think it's a very key memory on which we can really discuss what Adrienne Maree Brown also asked at that specific part that you just mentioned. Like, how do we engage with that with a child? And that memory you just shared is just a wonderful picture to just kind of have a nuanced discussion around it, because let's imagine that your mother at that moment, instead of panicking about, for example, a certain violent content that you would be subjected to, right? Instead of panicking, perhaps if she could take it a bit more nuanced, and if she could just take a look at what you were looking at and then assess the level of danger that it could pose to you, and then have a more nuanced discussion with you without internalizing the kind of shame that she felt against that kiosk person, right?
I think that would have been a much better response, indeed. And
exactly.
That's a healthy way to engage with children's sexual curiosity.
Yeah.
I wish her reaction would have been like that in a way. But at the same time, I don't think that my mother's generation, in the specific context in which she was raised to, I don't think they had these tools either.
No,
to actually engage in healthy ways to teach children about their sexual exploration and self-love practices.
I know. There comes a point, right, in therapy as well, that you just have to say that certain things were just too much to expect from our parents or something. I guess. Okay, I still haven't made peace with that. But on the other hand, of course, I understand. Yes, it's generationally maybe not something they learned or they didn't have it as a tool. But also, it's not so difficult, right? To just have a bit of a distanced approach to such a moment. Like, I wish that was possible, not only for your mother, but also like for my mother, or the way people behaved that I socialized with this and such.
Yeah.
I had the sex talk that was very awkward for me. I still give credits to my father, at least for trying. I know many parents don't even try.
A for effort.
So true. He gets an E for effort. And but I discovered by accident, just like you as well, like, oh, this feels good. And then I went on with it until I one day just ejaculated. And I couldn't believe what happened. I was like, what is this? What is this?
You're like, holy shit, that was nice.
Yes. And now that I think of that, maybe there's also something nice about not having known what was coming, and then suddenly that gave me that possibility to engage with that moment with a total beginner's mind.
You know what? I agree with you. That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really makes the experience even more, I don't want to say fulfilling, but I don't know, it just gives it almost a sense of magic, right?
It's magic. Such a discovery. I don't even remember if I ever discovered anything as magical after that.
I assume not.
No, look, discovering orgasm. Can you believe that? Like,
yeah.
I think it's massive.
I think it's the biggest discovery of our lives.
Yes. And, you know, I agree with Adrienne Marie Brown's claim that, quote, if more people were encouraged to masturbate early and often to learn what feels good to them, and that they have the right to communicate that, there would be less sexual trauma, assault, patriarchy, misogyny, and general awkwardness, end quote.
Oh, I mean,
100% would put my signature under this.
If I could snap my fingers, I would.
Yes, exactly.
That's truth. That is fucking preach, sis.
Truth to the max.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's right, honestly. I think it could be as easy as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also explains why a lot of shame is generated, because being without that shame means that you're very liberated. And who doesn't want your liberation? Your fucking oppressor, right? So it really just makes sense that they generated all that shame around pleasure and masturbation as well. The
shame that we feel serves them. It deserves us, but it serves them in so many ways. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if you've seen, you probably have seen, but nowadays Instagram is putting very, very oppressive regulations that could potentially really ruin the works and the careers of sex coaches and sex facilitators who navigate their careers mostly through social media.
Exactly.
And I think that's extremely related to the sense of shame that we are taught and that is used as a tool of oppression by the system in which we live. We are so unwilling to give us the freedom and the complete honesty and openness to explore our sexual potential. And instead of that, we're putting even more regulations around it, and we're putting even more oppression on top of it, which I find completely appalling, to be honest.
Same. I mean, sexual liberation is a nightmare for our oppressors, and you can see that in their action, in their regulations, in the new laws they pass. They just make their target really clear. And it makes me even believe even harder that this is crucial. Pleasure politics is crucial for our liberation.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, the second tool, Orgasmic meditation. To me, it felt like sharpening and broadening the sensation of an orgasm, the way she mentions this practice, right?
Yeah.
Spreading it to the entire body and experiencing it longer and deeper, and achieving that through a daily practice of focused orgasms. I love this.
I love this too. And I have to say, I don't I don't think I was ever told that this was a possible practice until I read this book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a pity, isn't it? I could have known this for all my life, and the discoveries I would have made. I probably would have invented some kind of I mean, I feel like if you explore your orgasmic sexual potential, you can truly have incredible releases of your own potential intellectually, emotionally, mentally, everything, all of that.
Wow. Wow, that's so true. I find them very interconnected as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my god, it directly connects to the life purpose.
Exactly.
To deep life purpose that we have.
Yeah, I mean, truly.
I love that. And I also love how this practice led Brown to notice that every one of her orgasms had a different emotional flavor.
Yeah.
Like getting to know your orgasm that deeply, having such a sensitivity towards it, sounds so wonderful to me. I really want to get there as well. And just like you said, that is so true. I think such a practice, deepening this practice, could really lead us for bigger releases in much, much different fields of our lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% believe that. It cannot be only focused on one result, right?
Yeah.
The exploration of our own pleasure potential is completely related and connected to the rest of our potential. I'm convinced of that. There is no other way around it.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Because it's not just physical, it's also very much a reaction of your nervous system. It's your sensations. It's also patterns, because you have habits of touching yourself. So you're repeating maybe the same movements quite often and you don't even notice it. But these can maybe even create almost I would say almost a coding of your own body structures.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I really like that approach. Feels very science fiction and feels very true.
Yeah, the both at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The third tool is self-pornography, creating your own pornographic or erotic material with your own body for your own body. So by taking pictures first and videos, just for your own eyes to see, right? And then using that material the next time you pleasure yourself.
Wow. I mean, I love it, but I've never done it.
That's such a brilliant idea, right? It's such a brilliant idea.
It's really brilliant. It really is. And she's not the first person who I was gonna say who I know. I don't know Adrienne Maree Brown, but I feel
I wish.
I aspire to know her. But she's not the first person who mentions this practice. Someone in my close circle actually have been engaging with this specific practice for I don't know how long now, but maybe a couple of years, 2 years, a year and a half or so. And
beautiful.
I always found it so beautiful and so badass too, and and so very connected to yourself, and in a way it can be seen as, I think it can be seen as something that might even allow you to unleash a completely different kind of love towards yourself.
Exactly. It's really transformative.
Yeah.
And I really love how, for example, this practice deepened Brown's acquaintance with her own body, and it really enabled her to see skinny as one way people are, as opposed to the physical supreme.
Yes.
That alone is just an incredible transformation, because this is literally a decolonization of her perception and her desire as well.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah. And centering your own image and on your own body as a pornographic or erotic material is also an incredible decolonization practice for the politics of desirability. The politics of desirability is dictating this white supremacist ideal to all of us.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there you are with your iPhone's front camera collecting these wonderful images of your face and your body and using it as the most desirable material you have around. It's so transformative and so important, I feel.
It's extremely powerful, and I love that she she uses this practice as a way to get off, but of herself, you know. That's something that I've never done before, but that I truly believe in.
I know. I mean, I wanted to ask you because, like, do you experience a similar desire towards yourself? And would you have liked to be able to fuck yourself as an exterior other person?
I mean, to the second question, yes, of course. Absolutely. Wouldn't you?
Oh, I definitely do. Oh my God. I am my type. Seriously. If I begin telling the things I would do with myself, this would go on forever and in a very different territory. And it's also kind of private. Yeah.
Maybe that's for a future endeavor.
Yeah, exactly.
For OnlyFans.
The things I would do with myself. Oh my God. It makes me crave it. But yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Love that. But to answer your first question, I don't know if I'm there yet, to be quite honest, in that area. I would love to get there. I've never had such a practice, even a similar one, that would allow me to go on that path. But I am open to it, and I would love to reach that point where yeah, I can just basically jerk off to myself instead of whatever porn I'm watching. What about you?
This is not very news to me, like finding myself desirable for myself. Not that I really practiced creating self-pornography in my own image, but I occasionally definitely did think of that, like how I wanted to make out with myself. Like how I find myself so desirable. Like how I find my beautiful sensitive nipples such a turn on for myself. Like it's enough to get myself horny with a single touch on my nipple from myself.
That's amazing.
This beautiful tender skin and my ass and my legs. Like when I sit down or lay down and I see my own legs, if I'm just wearing an underwear or shorts, my own legs turn me on. Like I'm like, oh my God, this is so sexy. Like I want to use these. Like I want to use these.
I love that.
Body parts. Yeah.
I love that for you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I have felt that. I have felt that all my life. Like really found myself really desirable, and there's also this frustration with that, like, oh my God, like look at these legs and these arms and these nipples and I want to fuck this thing, but it's me. How do I do that? It's so like, how do I satisfy that?
You have to clone yourself. I think that's the
exactly.
That's
oh
the
my
solution.
God. Yeah, I wish that was possible.
Or you could make a mold of your own dick and then fuck yourself.
Yeah,
with that.
there are actually products sold like that. You can make a mold of any dick that you want, and then you can make a sex toy out of that. I love that. It's so innovative. But it's also not only about my physical reality and existence, but also it's about like me. It has to be a second me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not only the way that I like how it looks, but also like it's myas that I want to fuck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So even a clone won't do. It's just impossible. Maybe in my dream.
Yeah, keep it in your dreams for now, baby.
Dream on.
Keep on dreaming.
Thanks for the encouragement.
You're welcome.
So moving to the fourth tool, if you don't have any other notes for the third one.
Let's do it.
It's developing erotic awareness, or alternatively, staying curious. So basically, Brown says, try not to say never. So try to keep a beginner's curious mind. And in this context, perhaps exchange a never with haven't tried yet. So this shift, this openness, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really like that, I have to say, because I think there's also, at least in the way that I was raised, or not exactly raised, but maybe the people I was hanging out with when I was let's say, at the beginning of my sexual exploration, so when I was a preteen or a teenager, there was this culture around maybe shaming people for not having tried stuff, or for having tried stuff, or for
Mm-hmm.
wanting to do certain things more specifically.
Yeah.
And as a very sexual person, you know me, I want to fuck everything that moved. But at the same time, I would have been called a slut or other insults if I had been open about that. So I kind of grabbed the habit of always saying to the question, whatever question that might be, ooh, would you ever do that? Or have you ever done that? I would be like, oh no, never.
Yeah.
To be kind of like prudish, fake prude, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I found it interesting the way that she reframes that for myself, even because I thought about it and I was like, oh, wait, this is how it happened. This kind of fake
Yeah.
prudish phase that I had during my teenagers, which completely disappeared by now. I'd like to say that to our audience,
I can
obviously.
confirm that.
But yeah.
I understand how you felt cornered to practice that by slut shaming.
Yeah, exactly. It can be tricky, especially
Mm-hmm.
when kids that age, they're horrible. They're just super mean, and you as a child, or me as a child, as at least I wanted to fit in, and I didn't want to be seen,
Yeah.
to be looked at as someone who's weird or a
Yeah.
slut or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So yeah. Now I don't care. Call me a slut. I find it to be a compliment of the highest
You will
form.
send a thank you note back.
A gift basket, yes. Did you ever engage in those kind of, I would say, quote unquote, bad habits of closing yourself to certain things, either out of not necessarily fear, but maybe fear of judgment or fear of yourself, even?
Fear of myself. Wow, that's really interesting. That's much deeper. It wouldn't be honest if I say that fear didn't dictate any of my actions about myself, but particularly in the case of peer pressure or slut shaming, I didn't experience it. Perhaps because I am a cis man.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably also the thing with the culture that always shames women who are freely experiencing sexuality. When men do the same, they're uplifted, right? But also, as a queer cis man, I also had the sense that this heteronormative, heteropatriarchal sexuality that is advertised everywhere in the media, in the television, in the magazines and newspapers, just wasn't something for me. So then I felt like whatever I have to express is already gibberish to many people. So who cares? Like, I will just express whatever I feel and whatever I desire. And that's what I did. I think that was at the core of how I felt around these things.
Okay, yeah.
And I've always felt safe to do so, even though situations weren't sure to be safe. But I somehow felt safe, and then I was always very clear.
Yeah.
Like, the way I met some friends when I changed schools in high school was that on my first day, during a break, I was just drawing random dicks on my notebook. and the person sitting across me, she just turned back and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just drawing random dicks that I like the shapes of." And then we became best friends. You know what I mean? I was like, this was the level of openness I had around all my desires.
I mean, that's fucking amazing. Yes.
Yeah, right? That's true. It is quite nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. Drawing
Yeah.
dicks everywhere. That's so you.
That's so me. I love how Adrienne Maria Brown is encouraging us towards this openness, because this can really lead to an erotic reimagining of our lives
Yeah.
and a heightened sense of our experience in a feeling body with memories and dreams and energies, spirits, ancestors. It feels like a key mindset to me to navigate the world in.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we definitely need to keep in mind throughout our lives, not only in necessarily the sexual branches of our lives, but also keep that erotic curiosity for other things and for. I think you can bring the erotic in pretty much anything, which is what she actually talks about in this specific tool section, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Very true. Shall we move on to the fifth tool, the last one?
Yes.
It is talk about sex. So ask questions, just let it go and engage in the conversation. And in this last part, I found myself mostly thinking of her words. Quote, suffering is a massively important and absolutely true part of life, a spiritual reality. But I deeply believe we were not placed on this gorgeous, sensational planet to suffer. It is not the point. End quote. What do you think of that, Lucy?
I completely fucking agree. I don't believe for one second that suffering is the reason why humans have been put on this planet, and that although, as she said, it is part of life and it can be really draining and very drowning as well, it's important to remind ourselves that we don't have to let it navigate our lives, and not that we necessarily let it per se, because sometimes we just can't even fight about it and it's not about choice again. But when this suffering is part of the oppression that is put onto us, that is a completely different suffering. And that is that suffering that I believe does not have to rule our fucking life. And it's so fucking cool that she mentioned that, and that she almost ends with that on this chapter. Yeah,
definitely. That was the nuance that I wanted to bring to this quote, because suffering is very often, a result of a systemic construct, right? So those, I feel, need to be dismantled, and the suffering caused by all the oppressors should cease to exist.
Exactly.
That's for sure, in my opinion. But suffering, for example, related to grief or related to love, we can't just throw out of the window.
No.
We would be losing something crucially important to being a human and experiencing humanity and humanness. And I really love this because I also heard Adrienne Murray Brown, I think it was on their podcast with Tosh Vegan, the Octavia's Parables, that she mentioned, like, deciding to love someone is also preparing to grieve for them, because there might be a point of losing them. There will be eventually by death for sure, right?
Yeah.
So how grief as a suffering, or maybe grief should just be framed as a grief and not as a suffering, a crucial part of love and how we experience love, how it's inseparable almost. Like, that kind of suffering to me also feels very essential and very spiritual, a spiritual reality, like Brown also says.
It does.
And I really love that.
I agree with you.
But I overall really love this argument because it really, again, forefronts the pleasure as a goal. It proposes that everything should be formed towards that, towards achieving that, right? I really like that.
I love the fuck out of that.
Yeah, same. So I want to end it by two sentences that's been resonating with me since the first time I've read this book in 2019. What is easy is sustainable. What feels good is sustainable.
What feels good is sustainable. Yeah. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. Such a base for the structures that we can create, right?
Yeah, and it should be a very basic knowledge element that we should all be sharing with one another and transmitting to future generations as they grow.
Exactly. And also, having to push through is a method of white supremacist grind culture, I feel. Just push through, you know? You will just, like, cross the bridge. And it doesn't have to be that way, because that's not sustainable. We're not going to just push through all our lives.
No.
It needs to feel good. We need a method that is easy, chill, that feels good, so that it can be sustainable.
Exactly, because pushing through is the opposite of sustainability, I think, in our lives. Pushing through is draining our batteries over and over again without refilling them in between, basically.
So true.
So no, fuck pushing through. And it's also, I'm so over grind culture and hustle culture and all of that. And I mean, I'm not against people sharing their achievements and such, but I think that sometimes it's setting unrealistic goals for other people who do not have the same life, nor the same life experiences, nor the same goals. And then especially, I'm thinking particularly on social media and Instagram and such. And then when you look at that, you feel almost shamed for not having done even half of what this person did at the point they are in their lives. And maybe you're older and you haven't done half of it. Or maybe you're younger and you feel like you should be at that point already.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. For example, on Twitter, sometimes I see tweets that says like, I'm 28 and so far I did this master's, I did this program, I traveled to these continents, blah, blah, blah. What have you done? Like, I'm like, girl, this is so rude.
Excuse me.
That's so terrible in so many levels. Why would you say such a thing? And like, good for you.
Yeah,
fuck off. You're a nasty human being. Like, it really doesn't make me feel like celebrating you when I hear you
don't
frame
need to
it
be,
like that, right?
It's a completely insensitive way of sharing your achievements, because it's not thinking about people who didn't have even the option or having the same path for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So fuck you, whoever you are.
So we're ending on this love note. That's all my notes for this episode, Lucy. And I loved it. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. It was a pleasure, truly.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun yet again, and I think we had beautiful, beautiful conversations. I really hope people listening will enjoy it as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Exactly. Many thanks to our listeners again, and we look forward to meeting you again in our next episode, in which we will discuss pleasure activism between pages 127 to 163. So until then, have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much.
All right, see you at the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You can find us on Instagram at Soft Edges Podcast for all our future updates and an archive of all our content so far. Our music is by the amazing Patrick Valenga, and our graphic design is by the wonderful Yuri Sato. Thank you so much for listening.